outside because we have a lot of guns and we have a lot of drugs in our, in our rural areas and tribal areas. So I think this is also becoming a hotbed for the terrorists and Taliban. Mm-hmm. So I think the responsibility goes to the government, and I always, I feel very, it's a very sad situation that government is not paying attention to, to giving proper facilities to the young youth so they can get quality education, which has, which is very humanitarian,
necessary for them,
humanity-based education.
It will give them the tools to succeed in life.
Sports are very important.
So, Daba, I want to ask you, when we talk about violence, and extremism particularly, it's not always just driven by religious reasons. I mean, there are political reasons, racial reasons, and in South Africa, there's also a history of far-right movements, which now we're seeing in Europe and in other parts of like Germany. We've seen this in Poland and also in Austria. But speaking from your experience, how do you then create an environment? And especially when you see that the governments are not doing what needs to be done, how do young people, their foundations, create those opportunities where youth can be taken away from the message that attracts them when it comes to them from extremist mindset?
Well, one thing that people obviously need to know is that young people need to be young people to be able to express themselves. When you look at majority of Africa, majority of the young people actually live in rural areas, right? And so in the rural areas, being the most poor areas, they do not have opportunity to engage in recreational activities. Here in the developed world, kids are able to take up computer class, basketball, they're able to go bowling, they're able to go watch movies. So in these areas, they don't have these opportunities to play sports, etc. And so what ends up happening is that they engage in social ills such as alcoholism abuse, drug abuse, and of course a lot of sex, and you get a lot of teen pregnancy. So we need to be able to provide kids with the essential tools to become kids, right? To be able to understand and educate themselves in the things they're interested in, whether they want to produce movies or they want to produce music. They don't have these opportunities.
So if they have an outlet, basically if they have a healthy outlet, then they may not turn towards unhealthy activities. This town hall today that we're doing, Thinking Forward, it also being broadcast on Facebook, and not only on Voice of America's main English language page, but also on several language services pages. So if you're from different parts of the world, you can join your own Facebook page right now and watch this over there and share your thoughts and your comments, not just with us, but also with people from your own countries. At this point, I want to take a couple of comments that we have received through our social media. And this one is about extremism. I have it right here in front of me. It's Manumna Emmanuel says that mostly extremism is because of a lack of Western education, because 70% of young people involved in terror are illiterate and lack proper orientation. I want to ask my panelists in DC, is this an Eastern-Western divide? Is it because of a lack of Western education? Eamon?
Well, it's a very tricky question, given the fact that one of the militant groups in my continent is actually called Boko Haram, which stands for Western education is
it's forbidden. It's forbidden. Haram, un-Islamic.
Haram. So it's kind of funny to draw that link, which I don't necessarily agree with, because at least the Middle East has been a cradle and has been a very welcoming environment for sciences, for philosophy, for knowledge in general, but not at the current moment. This has been the case a couple of centuries ago, not very long ago, but it's very unfortunate that nowadays, with the the discovery of petroleum resources and all these natural resources, which are like turning to be kind of a curse on the people of these regions, that education is not having, and science and knowledge are not having as much attention, as much funding as they used to have before. So I don't think it's Western versus Eastern, but it's rather the current situation has pushed people away from focusing on these. I hear it a lot in my community saying it's not the right moment to discuss this. It's not the right moment to discuss harassment because now we have to focus on economic situation. So it's never not the right time. It's any time is a good time for any topic that really touches upon our lives.
When we talk about, it could be Western education or it could be, this cultural divide. One of the issues that then arises is that you are basically creating a divide between people who live in one part of the world or another part of the world. But when you look at young people, overall their challenges and their concerns are pretty similar. And I know, Rodan, you have actually worked in bringing people together and helping them understand each other. Tell us about that experience and how can the benefits of that be felt by the next group of people who could be coming of age in the next couple of years?
So being in Iraq, I lived there for 2 years, and right away what I noticed amongst the student communities on campus was that there's a lot of animosity and tension between the different ethnic and religious groups. And Iraq is an extremely diverse area. You have Kurdish Muslims, you have Kurdish Yazidis, you have Assyrians, Muslims as well. So what I did is I co-launched an organization called Student Ambassadors for Peace to just promote intercultural understanding. So we would hold workshops, but we would do something as simple as conduct a peace or tolerance walk. More than 300 students attended when we had that peace walk, and it really did, you might not think so, but it really did change the attitude amongst students. And so that's really where it starts. I started it at a university. It should start with education. In Iraq right now, the only religion that's being taught is Islam. But why are we doing that if there's couple other religions within the country? So that's one major issue. Then there's also a little anecdote I would like to share from when I was in Iraq. I had a Yazidi friend sitting next to me in the car when I was in Duhok, which is the city where I'm from, and we got to border security, and the security guard asked for our IDs. And the way IDs work in Iraq is they have your ethnicity and your religion stated on there. So mine stated Kurdish Muslim. My friend stated Kurdish Yazidi. So the security guard kind of leans over and whispers, "Do you know the person with you is Yazidi?" As if it's the biggest crime to be sitting with someone or hanging out with someone of a different religion. Why did he ask me that? There's clearly a lack of training on prejudice, on just not being racially segregating each other. Same thing goes for education. Had that security guard been taught from a young age that other religions are not bad, and here, let's not just learn Islam, let's learn what Yazidism is about, let's learn about Christianity. That's gonna open the eyes of young people because the person sitting next to you doesn't practice your religion. So it's definitely changing the attitudes and the tension amongst these young people.
Yeah, if you want to add something, because then I want to ask Muzammil a question about this.
Exactly. Speaking of this concept of East versus West, I think it is problematic when the continuity of the colonialist dynamic between the former colonies and their the monopole or the countries that used to rule them. It's when certain countries still enforce their languages to be taught in other countries, they still enforce, they invest in developing and improving, for instance, in my country, it's the French language, which is kind of dying everywhere in the continent, but we are still receiving funding. We're still having a very large French presence in Tunisia and mostly in North Africa, to continue the kind of the French hegemony over the region, which is not doing much for the host countries, which is not doing much for the people of my generation, because French is not now the language of the world trade, it's not the language of the world, cooperation. It keeps us like as if sort of isolated and only in direct need and dependency.
Dependence on one country.
On one cooperation.
Muzammil, I want to bring you into this conversation. I mean, right now, a major part of Afghanistan's economy is just being held through international aid. It's basically a war economy right now. And the concern is that once international forces leave, there could be a situation where, again, the economy could be in dire trouble, and you could see a rise in extremism and in elements that are not conducive to the progress of a country. Now, we see the Taliban and now even Daesh seem to have an unending supply in Afghanistan. What kind of a future do you see in this situation for your people?
One thing we saw, especially when we talk about from 2001 till 2014, our growth was double-digit growth, economic growth. But after the withdrawal of international forces, mainly around 150,000 international forces, they left. We faced some crisis because some of the people that were employed with them, they lost their jobs and the fund was coming. And overall, so now it's come to the natural way of development. So that's something is doing. Afghanistan, as I mentioned at the beginning, that it's of course it's an LDC country, but we are quite rich in terms of mineral resources. We have gas, we have oil, we have all kind of mineral resources inside the country. The government and the future government, and especially the responsibility of the younger generation, is to focus on that, acquire those skills that is needed for the development of these mineral resources. It will not only help the country to improve economically, but at the same time, it will create massive jobs inside the country, and that will automatically help those problems. The government currently, they're in a peace negotiation with Taliban. Hopefully, there will be some positive result in that. So I think the government currently, they're working on that area. But at the same time, for the future and for the younger generation, I think the job creation, we heard about the education level, Eastern or Western. It doesn't matter. What does matter is education. The education should be there. The literacy rate is quite low in Afghanistan. I think it needs to be worked on. The quality of the education, especially in the rural areas, it needs to be improved. The private education lately started, but I think it's a good addition to that. So once we have the quality education, then we have the youth with skill. There are some donors that are contributing to the skill development inside Afghanistan. So once we have the quality education, then we have skill development. At the same time, we have enough mineral resources. So I think all those can contribute to the future development of the country.
There are opportunities. And I think one of the major reasons that at the right time. At this point, I want to take a question from the floor because we have a live audience here too. And in the spirit of the true town hall, let's hear what this question is.
Hello. This question is to Mr. Mandela. You mentioned that kids in South Africa, in rural areas in South Africa, need to be kids. Have there been any existing programs or developing projects dedicated to this mission? Thank you.
Hi. Yes, well, I work at the Africa Rising Foundation, which we started back in 2010. And our work has, primarily been focused in the rural areas. And we work in education, technology, entrepreneurship development, and celebrating African culture. Because we see ourselves as a catalyst in creating a new generation of African leaders who will empower themselves to be at the forefront of Africa's development. We have just completed a 3-month computer programming course for 60 youth. 40 of those were in high school and the other 20 were unemployed youth. And it was really an amazing program where kids, after 3 months, wrote an exam with Oracle, who is a software company, and then were able then to get a certificate. And once they get a certificate, we then assist them to get jobs in the related areas. Of course, computer program takes a while, so this was really just the first level of them being able to get a certificate and move on to the second level. We also have an agricultural program. As you know, agriculture is one of the biggest ways in which young people can get involved, but unfortunately, young people in today's world, when you talk about the picture of success, they don't see themselves wearing a working suit and rain boots. When you talk about the picture of success to young people, they see themselves wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, and going into an air-conditioned building. So now we're trying to teach young people and promote agriculture's business to say, you can make just as much money, doing bee farming or doing, farming and growing crops or, nuts or fruits, etc., right? And not necessarily going to this office. So it's also a lot of the time that young people don't have the information. They don't have access to information in order to empower themselves. And that's why they always, running to go into the cities, and it becomes a huge problem with this migration that's taking place. We need to give young people access to information so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. We also do career guidance. So this year we actually had the National Youth Development Agency talking about the career opportunities. We got the Nedbank Foundation involved. We got the Department of Tourism involved. We even had the National Air Force involved coming to young people in high school, teaching about the different career opportunities that exist in these different institutions. So those are the things that young people need to have access to have information. That's why the internet is so important. But as you know, in the rural areas, people don't have internet. They don't have computers, and majority of kids in rural areas actually finish high school without even touching a computer. So how are we going to compete on a global level when our kids don't have sound and knowledge of technology? So those are the kinds of programs that we bring to our kids in the rural areas.
All right. So as we saw, young people are full of bright ideas. They know the problems. They also have ideas about solutions. But then the question is anyone listening? People who are in power, people who get to make policies, are they paying any attention or not? And when we actually look at political engagement as far as young people are concerned, the fact is that the average age of parliamentarians around the world is about 53. So when we talk about young people and trying to get their voices heard, before we talk about how this can actually be made a reality, a possibility, let's hear what some young people in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Kurdish regions of Syria and Iraq told us about what they think of politics and politicians.
I think that what we need right now is not someone that's old and wise. We need someone ambitious, someone who has a lot of ideas that can motivate young people around us.
I don't trust the political parties at all, because in Pakistan, every party promises that if we win elections, we'll do this and that for you, but they don't fulfill campaign promises.
I'm 18 years old and they don't care about my needs. They just care about their own businesses, and they just want to live for their own self, not for those people. But actually, these things happen, but they don't care about us.
It is very easy to sit or walk in the streets and around and judge this country's political system. But actually, in reality, if you look at the 4 decades of war that this country has been through, it is really difficult to bring stability that easy to this country.
If a leader of a country can be a young person, it can bring modernization in a country, and it can facilitate many things that a young generation wants.
Older elected officials think they know better and have enough experience to serve the society. However, I think young people can handle their issues much better.
Younger people can handle their issues much better. That's why we have young people here today. Iman, I want to ask you this question. At the beginning of the program, we talked about the Soweto uprising in South Africa. And fast forward to 2011, the Arab Spring literally was sparked in Tunisia when a young man set himself on fire because he was desperate and sick and tired of the lack of opportunities that he had. Since that time, we have seen street action, but very little has translated into actual policy changes. Is street action, street power enough?
It is powerful, and I've been honored to be part of it for years in Tunisia, and the results, unfortunately, do not come straight away. They don't manifest themselves as soon as we want them to do. Unfortunately, and that's what creates a frustration, and that's what makes people lose hope sometimes. Unfortunately, these are the rules of the game, and solutions and better situations do not fall from the skies. We have to fight for them. We have to continuously fetch them. And that's what we are doing, and that's what's happening at least in Tunisia and in other neighboring countries. What should be done better, in my opinion, is that people who have been fortunate enough to see better examples, who have had the chance to travel, because this is one thing probably we haven't spoke about until now, and it is the restriction on mobility of young people. People maybe in the developed world don't know much about the concept of visas, don't know much about the lines and the months of waiting in front of foreign embassies, and it's like sort of humiliating, and it creates that first dynamic of, whether you like that country or not, whether you are, have a positive impression of its people or not. If you are humiliated, if you are staying in lines for days and for weeks and for months sometimes under the rain and under the sun to get a simple paper that will allow you to get into another country. So just to go back to your question, people who had the chance to see better examples, to see how a functioning system like here, like in most developing countries, can bring back that knowledge, can transfer this know-how, and they can help people back home replicate and adapt it to the local culture context and make it work so that...
And the interesting thing also is that in countries in Asia and Africa, young people actually tend to vote in larger numbers. They're more politically active in a lot of those countries compared to Western democracies. Muzammil, I want to ask you this question. You heard what a lot of young people, in fact, had to say about politicians. They don't really trust them. What got you interested in politics, and what does it feel like when you hear that young people don't trust people like you?
Traditional politician, and that's why the place comes that the younger generation should step in. What I experienced, especially looking to Afghanistan government, the two government, President Karzai's and currently President Ghani's government, I think the younger generation, they were given opportunities. Like myself, I started and I raised through the rank quite quickly. But going to the parliament, because parliament is one of the institutions that you need qualified people, you need younger generation. For a country where the population of more than 65% or younger generation, I think that is needed. So that's why the hope of these people, or those people that they're expecting the new generation to bring change. And I think with that, many things will change. And once you have a strong parliament, so you can have strong monitoring system, you can have strong, you can develop laws which can help the younger generation, especially the ordinary people. So I think they are fed up with the traditional politician. They're fed up with those people that they were involved in the 4 decades of war, killing each other, whatever it happened. So they don't want those people. So that's why when you see to Afghanistan future election, which is supposed to be held on 20th October, around 80% of the candidate, they might be below 35 years. So that is a big number, and we are expecting that a huge number. And I'm quite hopeful that majority of the next Afghan parliament will be the younger generation, that they will be below 35 years of age. So I think that will contribute a lot to help those problems that is faced by the younger generation right now.
And change the perception of politics and politicians. At this point, I want to take a question from our live audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you. As a young professional from Africa, I would like to know what you suggest others like me focus on and take on ourselves to address first, as there are a lot of issues and obstacles on a social level, economic level, and political level. Thank you.
Ms. Rain, I want you to take that question.
Thank you. While the two gentlemen were talking, I was just thinking about how in Kenya the youth blindly engage in politically instigated violence after a small bribe. And this is probably in support of, empty promises, in support of what their leaders have promised them to deliver. And personally, I encourage the youth to, take initiative, go out there and, believe in yourself, believe in what you can do, and take action. You cannot always depend on the government or blame the government for not having certain opportunities. The opportunities are there, and yes, it is true, sometimes the market is not ready for skilled youth. The market may not be ready for us, but then what do you do with that? If you have the skill and you can do something with it, go out there and create it. Partner with other youth, partner with other individuals with the same vision. I saw something very exciting in the last 6 weeks while I participated in the Mandela Washington Fellowship. And the young African leaders, I was with 25 other African leaders, and it's incredible. We all have great opportunities. We all have this vision of making our countries better, and we know we can work together, but there are all these barriers that our governments place that, okay, you cannot work with South Sudan, we're having these political issues, let's not get involved in that. If you know you can make it better, work together regardless of what the political situation is.
So in a way, don't get involved in bad politics, but still be politically active. I do want to take this moment right now to actually go to some viewers in Bangladesh, because this town hall is being viewed by people around the globe and they want to ask a question. So I would like to welcome our viewers in Bangladesh right now. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, so the average UN age for parliamentary candidacy is like 53, which is really so high in terms of young generation of today's world. So how do you think that the younger generation of 30s or below 40s could really come forward with what support from the government and other stakeholders in the field, that what support they could provide to the young people to come forward for the parliamentary candidacy to uphold their democratic rights and speak up and then go into the parliament?
Eamon, were you able to catch that question?
Sort of.
Okay, all right. I was also having some trouble understanding what they were saying, but I think one of the points that they were raising was because the average age of parliamentarians, is about 53. What can younger leaders bring to the table if we take the question from that angle? What is it that you feel younger leaders can do that the older generation has not done or cannot do?
It's absolutely innovation that younger generations can bring to the table, can bring to the political game in general in our region. It's not, I would agree definitely with what you just said, but I also would still blame the governments in our region, because not only that they are not empowering youth, but they are also disempowering citizenship in general. So I would like one day, it's my kind of dream, to have young people's opinions respected as senior citizens, and we won't even talk about whether being young or old, because I would evaluate the ideas and the plans on the basis of doability and how good they are for the nation, for the country, not whether they come from young people or older citizen, because mostly in my country until like 7 years ago, before the revolution, no one's opinions mattered. Whether you're young, you're old, you are worthless because you're not part of the ruling party, you're not part of the 1% that rules the country, that acquires all the wealth, that appears on TV, even appearance on television. I actually come from the town where that misfortunate young man set himself on fire, and that's how the country entered into a revolution, entered into this large demand of change of norms and change of powers. People in my region wouldn't have dreamt of seeing one of them being on TV, let alone being on international TV. So and that in itself is like revolutionary.
This theme of not being heard, I've also seen this actually being echoed right now on our social media as well. And I want to read a couple of comments to our viewers around the globe right now. Dashti Abdullah says, most politicians in the Middle East do not want individuals and the society to be intellectuals or to be aware of their rights. They want to lead an uneducated society. And Kamal Aslan says, the problems that youth faces in Turkey is that we don't understand them and don't respect their opinions. We raise them so they would fit what society demands them to be. We raise them to obey. So you can get yourself heard on the streets, sure. But how do you translate that into action without being part of the political process? Rodan.
I would say with the problem with Iraq, I just want to start with saying that in order to actually hear your voice at the table, the older politicians need to provide a seat for young people at the table, and that's not what they're doing. So like we kind of talked about earlier, young people need to take it into their own hands. But really the greatest favor that older politicians can do for young people in Iraq is take a step back, allow young people to take over, because clearly the older politicians weren't successful enough in doing so. We need to allow young people to speak up. We need to have just as simple as having a minister of education be perhaps younger than 30 years old. That just to see how that would play out, what kind of changes that would make. So young people definitely have to fight for it themselves. The power comes from youth, so they definitely need to, in Iraq, in my opinion, they need to start demanding their voices to be heard. And
Even quickly add something, because I want to get Muzammil's take on this, because he's a young politician.
I think there is a special place in hell for people, for young people who don't support young people in our parliament, in our governments, because we have some of these people, but they tend to keep their mouths shut once they reach that position. And that's what makes us, look bad. And they set a bad example for young people. Like once they get the position, they do nothing, and that gives an excuse for older generations to say, well, he got the position, but he didn't do anything good with it.
We do also have to remember, though, who are those young people that are being hired by these politicians? Because in Iraq, we have a huge problem of corruption, particularly nepotism. So if you don't have a rich, wealthy politician, uncle or father, then you have very little to no chance of actually getting involved in politics. So if you do see young people speaking up in parliament, or not speaking up, but still being in that position, then you know that this is a result of corruption. It's a result of a corrupt system.
So you actually end up questioning their motives as well of why they are actually speaking up.
Because you need to look into how did they get there in the first place. Is it based on merit? And most of the time it's not.
Right. Muzammil, I want to ask you, and if you can briefly answer this question. Young people can bring innovation to leadership, but there's also this issue of inexperience. How do you overcome that problem?
There is one thing that the young people, they have the energy, they have the modern education or the latest education, they have the will to bring changes. They're progressive and they think about the positive changes and they want to have a rapid thing. The older generation, they are more happy with the status quo. They said, don't bother yourself, just things will move on. So yes, that inexperience can be just replaced with quality education that they're having in the amount that the energy that they can spend on it. So with the passage of time, they can improve. The other issue here, for example, in our parliament, in our political system, most of the warlords, they're part of the parliament, they don't care about anything else, just to keep themselves, aside from all other problems. So that's why the younger generation, they're stepping in because they say, we want a progressive Afghanistan here in Afghanistan. So that's why we need to bring changes. And that political will doesn't exist in the older generation that we are having right now.
And that is something that young people can bring. So if any one of you is wondering why Voice of America is doing this town hall, I have just the person here for you who can answer that question. Voice of America Director Amanda Bennett. Amanda, if you can please tell all our viewers spread around the globe, why are we doing this?
Well, I think you can hear from the answers in the talk that you're having here exactly why we're doing it, because what I hear is there's nothing more powerful in the world than knowledge and ideas. And Voice of America gives a free access to real ideas, positive ideas, negative ideas, and knowledge. And so for each one of you are saying that the thing that your countries need is for other people in those countries to see themselves as having a possibility, to see a place where something does work or have an idea about a different way of operating. And so I think the name of this session is Young Leaders, and I would have to say that I both envy you and I don't envy you in a way, because you have a heavy, heavy burden. It's a heroic burden. And a heroic burden is that you've had the intelligence, the drive, the luck, the opportunity to get where you are. Now you've got the responsibility not only to reach back and bring individuals along with you, but to think about how you're going to affect the system. That is a huge burden. The difficulties are enormous, but I like to think of it about the burden that a hero would have.
All right, thank you very much. That was Voice of America Director Amanda Bennett. And at this point, I want to go one more time to Daba Mandela. Daba, this world is a better place because Nelson Mandela lived among us. As we end this show, I want you to share a lesson from his life that you think the youth can take and run with.
Well, there's a number of lessons that my grandfather taught me, and obviously a lot of us around the world through his books. One of the lessons that he taught us is that in order to defeat your enemy, you need to work with your enemy, because then he becomes your partner. Another lesson he taught us is that love is much stronger than hate. If a person can be taught to hate, a person can be taught to love, because love comes much more natural to the human condition than hate. And finally, I want to say that we are the masters of our destiny. We therefore have a responsibility, a duty, an obligation to make sure those of us in privileged positions, those of us who are on this panel, need to do as much as we can to come together, to share what we're doing in our communities to empower young people. And, you know, Madiba, for me, was a man who put his life on the line because he believed in good that will always succeed over evil. And we need,
So with those moving words from Nelson Mandela, I would like to end our show today. Thinking Forward was a pleasure for me to be a part of. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists and all of our audience spread around the world. Thank you very much for being a part of this conversation. And with this, I bid you farewell. This is Sarah Zaman, wishing all of you a better tomorrow.